Hello, everybody. Welcome to Critical Conversations, Achieving Tribal and Urban Native Equity. I am Professor Lisa Ramos. I am an Associate Professor of History and the Mexican American Studies Program Coordinator at San Antonio College. So we're super excited to have you here for this event. And one of the ways we achieve equity is through education. So what we have first is an icebreaker. We have an online game called Kahoot, and we're going to ask you several questions and just see what do you know and what don't you know about local tribal and urban Native communities. So we're going to open up the Kahoot game right now. You should see it popping up on your screen. And what you want to do, so if you want to play along, just go to the website at the top where it says www.kahoot.it. And once you go to the website, or if you have the Kahoot app, if you're a student and if you've used Kahoot before, you can just go to the Kahoot app. And you're going to be asked to enter a game pin. So that is that number there on the top right. So if you could go to the website, enter the number. It's going to ask you to create a name, so you can just put your name there. We're going to give you a minute or two to go ahead and enter your names and sign on. And if you just want to play along, if you don't want to do it through Kahoot, feel free to, no pressure. So I'm just going to wait a minute or so for everyone who wants to play online. All right, we have our first player, Gael. So we're just going to wait a few more seconds, see who else pops up. Okay, so there at the bottom of your screen, you're seeing the website, kahoot.it. Great, so we've got some more players joining us. And while we wait, I'll just let you all know the trick to winning Kahoot, because it is a competitive game, it's like a game show, is you want to get the right answer, but you also want to be fast. So as soon as you see the right answer, you want to choose the corresponding color for that answer and press it on your phone, on your computer, and that'll put you at the top of the leaderboard. So be fast, be ready. All right, so I think this is good. We've got 6 players, so you can still enter if it's taking you some time. We're going to go ahead and get started with the first question. So we have several questions. You'll have 90 seconds to answer each question. All right, so our first question in this Critical Conversations. Here we go. All right, so Mission San Antonio de Valero is a cemetery burial space. Is that true or false? So on your device, you should see the colors. So pick the color that matches the correct answer. All right, so 3 people have responded. And you've got 1 second left. All right, so 4 people got it right. Wonderful. And the answer is true, as you see. And next we'll see the leaderboard. So let's see if we can see who's on top, the podium. All right, so we've got 3rd place, BKV, 2nd TK, and in the lead right now is Lai, I think, Lai. All right, good job, everyone. Let's go to the next question. Okay, let's go back. We went somewhere else, but that's okay. It looks like it was a little ad or something. Okay. Oh, looks like we've got, yeah, it looks like it's wanting us to start over. It looks like, yeah. So it looks like the game only had a one question in it, but that's okay. I'll just wait to see if we can get the other questions put up. But if not, the reason we're doing the icebreaker is we wanted to gauge our audience's knowledge. How much do you already know about local, native, and tribal communities? What could you learn? Like, how many of you knew that about Mission San Antonio de Valero? So part of what we're wanting the audience to get out of this event is to think about, if you already know a lot, what can you do to share this knowledge with others? If you don't know a lot, what could you do to educate yourself? You know, which of the missions might you be able to visit in a, of course, safe and socially distanced way? And what else could you be reading? So that's one of the things that our various panelists are going to talk about. Give us all ideas on how we can personally educate ourselves, or if we know a lot, how we can build collaborations and partnerships and really make sure that the wider San Antonio community is also learning this history. It should not be kept in a silo and isolated. All right, so looks like I'm getting a message that our game had some technical difficulties, so that's okay. What we're gonna do is just wait like a couple more minutes, see if we can find it. If not, then we'll just go ahead and get started with the panel. So let's just wait a couple more minutes and see if we can recover it. But if not, our winner was Lei. So congratulations, Lei. Good job on getting that question correct. You know your history. Yes, so it looks like we're still having some technical difficulties. We're going to try one more thing and see if we can recover it. But if not, don't worry, we've got a great lineup for you. And I do want to say thank you to our American Sign Language interpreters. We have two with us today, Emily and David, and we're so gracious and thankful that they're here to make sure that this panel is accessible to our deaf community. So thank you so much, Emily and David, who you'll see a little bit later. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started with the panel because we couldn't recover the Kahoot game, but I look forward to sharing my thoughts and to listening and learning from our Indigenous experts and elders. So thank you all for joining me for that quick Kahoot game. See you soon.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today in our event that's brought to you by American Indians of Texas, San Antonio College, and Dream Week in this session that's called Critical Conversations, Achieving Tribal and Urban Native Equity. This is where we're going to discuss with a panel of Indigenous representatives and academics the current educational and representative landscape for Indigenous people in our community. My name is Selena, and I was born and raised here in San Antonio, Texas. I am 27. I am an identifying Indigenous Native college student and educator. I am Chiricahua Apache, and I will be facilitating our conversation today. But first, I would really like to turn it over and welcome Ramon Diego Vasquez, tribal member of the Tapilam Kawiteke Nation, a Tekapaguama tribe, to begin our session by honoring us with a blessing.
Yes. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate this opportunity to share a little bit about ourselves, our culture, Native people across this city and region. And so today I'm here just to kind of honor my ancestors, my relatives, the elders that kind of taught me, brought me up, my family that raised me in these ways as a Coahuiltecan native from the Autecapagwama tribe. And so I'm honored to be here today with you all. I'm honored to be here with the guests that we have today. And I'm going to just share a little bit. It's very important about, when we come together, do events, have the honor to lay a foundation for everyone to honor and acknowledge the first peoples that were here on these lands. We are here in San Antonio, Texas, where for some tribal native people that are identified around Coahuiltecan nations and different tribes, which is about 150 or more different tribal communities that are from this region of South Texas and Northeast Mexico, and many other different tribes. And so for those of us that are of Coahuiltecan descent, we love to honor our ancestors who walked these lands before us, that know this land as Yanawana, which in the Bahlat language means the land of the spirit waters. And to our other relatives and other tribal nations that live in the South Texas region and across Texas and other parts, know as Estokna people or Carizo Crudo people that are first peoples as well of these lands, identify this land as Somisek. So we want to acknowledge and honor those folks and all the different tribal communities of the Aboriginal peoples that were here for thousands of years. And so we also want to honor other native communities and tribes that came to this area, that were either forced to this area against their will, to be real, or that found their way down here because of other needs and necessities for their longevity. So we want to honor their relatives as well and honor their ancestors as we pay our respects today. And so what else I want to do real quick is just in my way, we also like to give honor in way of a song or some way to present ourselves and our generation of people to our ancestors, to those spirits, to those ancestors that have passed from long ago, those ancestors, unfortunately, that may have passed recently due to this virus or the pandemic, that are now ancestors themselves, or even those that suffered through the missing and murdered Indigenous women and relatives epidemic as well. So all of these ancestors, all of these people that have passed on now, we still want to honor them and honor their presence with us always, and that spirit that they carry. And so you all can join in as well, honoring your own ancestry, honoring your own relatives that may have passed, people that really just you want to invoke in this moment to be with you, whether you feel triggered during these conversations or whether you feel empowered to ask proper questions, right? To our panelists as well as we get into a Q&A from the audience. And so just want to invoke that right now in a quick song. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share a little bit with that with you. And so sit with me with this song, honor your ancestors, I'll honor ours and all the other relatives that I can during this time. And then we'll continue on with our panel. Thank you all so much for allowing me this space and time. Nalet sam to you all. Thank you all. Now I'll pass it off back to Selena Cantu. Sorry about that. I'm also learning that we're having technical difficulties as well. We're going to try to get Selena back on here in just a second. So as we move forward in our presentation, we want to call on our panelists and give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. And at this time, we're going to be introducing those folks and get you all started in this conversation to really advance this work. And so I think first we are going to introduce Linda Jimenez, tribal elder of the Harame tribe of the Tepilam-Coateca Nation. Linda, why don't you share a little?
Good morning or afternoon, everybody. It's really nice to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this educational seminar, particularly because of Dream Week, because it's really important for us to understand that the kinds of things that Dr. King was talking about was not just for African American people, but it was for all the people, for all of us that have been marginalized and experienced racism. So this is a really good opportunity, and I want to thank the people from the Dream Week organizing that they invited us to participate in this as well. I'm a tribal elder. I belong to the tribal council of the Tepilam-Coateca Nation, representing the Harame clan, the Harame group, and I'm also a sun dancer, and I also pour water, which means that I run sweat lodges. I've practiced energy healing as well. I'm a San Antonio resident. I've lived here almost all my life, except the first 40 days. And I've been here that whole time. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Moni.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate that. What an honor to have you. We're going to go ahead and move on to another panelist of ours, introduce to you all and give her an opportunity. Dr. Zenthea, thank you for being with us. Really appreciate you. Give us a couple minutes of your time to introduce yourself.
Yes, well, thank you for having invited me to these important critical conversations. And I'm a social and cultural anthropologist. I'm part of a cultural research, anthropological, and performing group called Los Inocentes. I do cultural consultancy and advising. And actually, I'm an independent researcher. So I've worked with basically with cultural hybridizations of cultures, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you so much. We're honored to have you as well. Really appreciate your time. So at this time next, we're going to bring up our next panelist, Ramon Juan Vasquez, the Executive Director of the American Indians in Texas. Welcome. Thank you. If you can share a few words.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. This is great to be able to be in conversation with all the panelists and to see you all making this happen in coordinating with Dream Week. It's really important to have these conversations, especially when it comes to American Indians. American Indians are always the afterthought, especially here in Texas. And even though we can flip states in national elections, we're still not at the table when it comes to critical conversations nationally. And Texas is definitely, lags behind in all that effort. So I'm Ramon Vasquez. I'm the Executive Director of the American Indians in Texas at the Spanish Colonial Missions. I'm a member of the Tepilam-Coateca Nation. I've served in this capacity for over 25 years. I'm also a co-founder of the National Urban Indian Family Coalition, headquartered in Seattle, Washington.
Wow, great. That is an extensive background. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's an honor. Our next panelist that we're going to have on is a Native student, a Native identified student here at SAC. This is Gregory Garrett Estrada. Thank you. Welcome. Welcome. If you can tell us a little bit about yourself as well, Gregory.
First, I want to say thank you for having me here today. My name is Gregory Garrett Estrada. I am a sophomore student at San Antonio College and a history major. I'm part of the Yaqui-Oeme diaspora that spreads from within the United States, everywhere from California to Texas, and in Mexico, everywhere from Sonora to Chihuahua. I'm part of a small handful of families that are here in San Antonio as part of our diaspora. I'm also the president of the student organization at San Antonio College's Mexican American Studies Center called Somos la Gente, which is mainly advocates, is an ethnic studies club for students, and we're very inclusive, talking about Mexican American studies, Indigenous issues, Black studies, as well as other topics that we dive into. Thank you.
Awesome. Good to have you. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate you, Gregory. Looking forward to the conversations. Next up, we have some of our scholar panelists on with us. Dr. Lisa Ramos, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a few words as well, that would be great.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this collaboration. I've been teaching since 2001, so it's going to be 20 years this September. And once I started teaching full-time in 2008, I really tried to learn more about Indigenous histories and experiences and incorporate that into my classes on US history, Texas history, and Mexican American history. So I'm looking forward to listening and learning and advocating on behalf of Indigenous communities at SAC. I've been at SAC since 2015, and I teach history classes, as I mentioned, but I also run our Mexican American Studies program. So I'm excited to be here.
Great. Yeah, that is awesome. Thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to have you. One of our last panelists we have with us today is also Dr. Brooke. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Brooke. Really appreciate you. If you can give us a few words and introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you so much. Good afternoon. I am very happy to be here today. I look forward to listening to what my fellow panelists will share. I am Dr. Brooke Linsenbart, mostly Southern descent from what is also the St. Louis area. The Cheyenne River Youth Project is in Ochetisacoen, our Lakota community organization of the Wakpa-Washte area, or the Cheyenne River Reservation. And this is an organization that is really central to my personal and professional trajectories. So prior to my move actually to the DC area, I was an instructor in the history program at SAC and was the 2018-2019 Indigenous Studies Pre-Doc Fellow at Michigan State University. So I thank you all for welcoming me to this great panel and this conversation during Dream Week.
Definitely. Thank you. It's good to have you. Look forward to hearing more about your work for sure. This is great. Thank you so much. Selena, pass it back off to you. Thank you.
Sorry, I had some technical issues. At this moment, we were going to go ahead and start our Q&A with the panelists. The first question that I am going to ask is going to be focused more towards our Indigenous panelists. So these are some questions that I want to focus on them and kind of have their input back on them. So the first question is going to be, what is the current educational representational landscape of Native tribes in Texas?
There isn't one. There basically isn't one. There's at least in the not elementary, but the public schools, K through 12. Once you get into college then or university, then you have an opportunity to get into ethnic studies and some other kinds of opportunities to find out about the indigenous history. But basically, you get, you know, that they were here, we were here when the Europeans came, and that's about it. I'm sorry, I don't know exactly how we're doing this, if you're going to call on us or we're just supposed to speak. So
I believe it's just as you guys wish to speak.
okay, thank you.
To add on to Linda's comment, we basically there isn't one.
Well, I completely agree with Linda. Unfortunately, it's void of Native American education in the school system, and I really appreciate which the American Indians of Texas are doing, trying to educate the people of Texas, of San Antonio, regarding the importance of the Native Americans. And I've experienced with them many uh, bad outcomes, trying to make them being recognized, related them with the missions. So it's a lot of work that need to be done regarding the beginning with the knowledge of the Native Americans, of the Coahuiltecans, of the Tappilam Nation, and then with the advocacy and the activism towards the incorporation and recognizing the value and the contribution of the Native American communities in the United States, but also in the whole Latin American continent. I think that the effort that the American Indians of Texas are doing, it's incredibly important, and I hope that this first critical conversation, it's like the point of origin to start educating the whole community and looking into the importance of having their voices listened and known by everybody.
Um, I want to add on to what Linda Jimenez said earlier. From my experience in the public education system in San Antonio, there really isn't a lot of representation of Indigenous people within our school system. There have been field trips to areas like San Pedro Springs Park, but it's mainly how it's taught makes it seem that we are extinct or that we're similar to dinosaurs. And I've gotten a lot of comments from classmates, even into high school, by educators and by fellow students, saying things that, shouldn't I be extinct? Or, are you sure you're native? I thought they were all in New Mexico or Arizona.
Yeah.
That's where my experience has been. And then going into college, really the only courses that taught Indigenous studies or even acknowledged us as people alive today are Mexican American studies at SAC or a few history classes, but it's very limited in those areas, at least from my experience.
Thank you for that. Ramon, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have to remember is that Texas had the law of extermination. The only good Indian was a dead Indian, and that there's a deliberate effort to this day to make sure that the contributions of the American Indians to this state are minimized. It's a very deliberate effort. And according to the Texas legislation to this day, there are still no Indians in Texas, except for that are under their jurisdiction. So, we have a lot of work to do still in Texas. And so I think we just need to roll up our sleeves and make sure that the work continues, because when we talk about Texas, it doesn't stop at the Rio Grande, especially when we're talking about American Indians. that region extends all the way to northeastern Mexico. We're talking about Coahuila, Nuevo León, Tamaulipas, and parts of San Luis Potosí and Texas. That is our region. When other tribal communities across the nation can talk about their regions and they expand past border state lines, we are not given that same opportunity here in Texas. And so we have to remember that it's very deliberate. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I would like to turn it over to our academic panelists to see if they would like to add anything.
Yes, so I just want to note that when I started teaching in 2015, it was really important for me to include Indigenous communities and voices. And so in 2016, I invited Mr. Ramon Vasquez to my Texas history class. And I was so thankful to him because he came without question, and he came many times. In the past 4 years, he's visited my Texas history and Mexican American history classes because I knew that I was not the expert. I did not grow up in an Indigenous community. I did not have the knowledge. And so we tend to think of academics as being the keepers of knowledge, but in this case, we're not. As Ms. Jimenez said, there isn't a landscape. So I was not educated, and I had to educate myself, and I continue to do so. But one of the themes that I heard coming up was existence. After I brought Mr. Vasquez the first time to San Antonio College, I think I told you, Ramon, I had a professor come up to me and say, well, I know some information about that group. You might want to not, basically trust what they said. So just this questioning, like Greg was saying, well, do they exist or not exist? And just the audacity for us to tell a group of people, you don't exist, you don't know what you're talking about. So there's still a lot of that pushback because the mainstream community thinks, like we've said, that American Indians, Indigenous peoples have vanished, or they're hostile, or they're just peaceful and passive. And those are those recurring themes that we have to fight against. So I'd love to turn it over now to my colleague, Dr. Linsenbach, because she, I know, has studied this and we've had great conversations.
Well, thank you, Lisa. First, hopefully y'all can still hear me okay. But if not, just tell me. So I think there's a bit of things that I picked up on in the conversation so far. So thank you all for your comments. And the one thing I guess I wanted to extend upon is the narrative of the quote unquote vanishing Indian mythology and how they're the academy, or as seen as keepers of knowledge, as Lisa said, or even other ways, right? Education is a colonial tool often used as erasure. And so I think this is a really important panel to start building relationships and conversing to show where we can start moving forward from this. But certainly there are several instances I could speak on too, perhaps later on or now if y'all would like to hear them, about times that with my experience at SAC and in the ways that there are still these narratives of erasure happening daily in institutions, even at SAC.
One of the things I'd like to mention is that there was an anthropologist who came here, and Ramon, you can correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but as I understand it, there was an anthropologist who was here in San Antonio in the 70s and wrote a book called The Indians of Texas, where he said that we were no longer here. The Coitecans didn't exist anymore. But he never went to the missions. He never went and talked to anybody who might actually know if the Coitecans were here or not. So, there's that part of the academic part of it that's difficult, because they go where they know to go, where they've been told, or where they have an idea from previous records, but they don't really look into the community. They don't really think about talking to the actual people who were here.
Yeah, that's a major problem and has been in the past, Linda, because unfortunately, what many scholars do is they regurgitate, what they've heard. And unfortunately, you know, with the original source, there was no direct communication. And so when you have half a century that's passed and it's still being regurgitated, then we put ourselves in a position where we make people dumber, you know, with all the knowledge that we have to this day. You know, at a time where we've educated more people in the history of the world, unfortunately, we leave some of them dumber, you know, by what we do.
Thank you for that. For the next question, I just wanted to go ahead and ask, what are the systems that have led us to where we all currently stand on this landscape? So again, I want to turn it over to our Indigenous panelists to go ahead and answer first, and then we can go ahead and turn it over to Greg and then our academic panelists.
I think that's an interesting question. Some of the responses that we've already made address that a little bit, because we've talked about, you know, people using using the same sources over and over again, and not really looking to new opportunities. I think one of the things, though, that somebody alluded to it, I don't remember who it was. I don't remember if it was Dr. Ramos or Dr. Linsenbart, but you all were talking about the fact that you know, we have Chicano studies now, we have Mexican American studies, we have Indigenous studies. All these ethnic studies programs that exist today are beginning to break through that, and that those things they're changing the systems that are keeping us, that have resulted in where we are today. They're beginning to make those changes. I think the fact that with the new Biden administration, we actually have a Native American person who's leading the Department of Interior is a huge win. And that is one of the systems that I think hopefully will get changed, because you have a person at the head who understands what's going on. It's not somebody who's come in, you know, it's like New Yorkers who come to San Antonio and want to tell us how to run San Antonio. It just doesn't work. You know, you have to be familiar, you have to be here for a while, you have to know things. And it's very discouraging to see those systems continue to replicate the previous kinds of grievances and the previous kinds of injustices.
So following that question, could you possibly maybe talk to us again, maybe possibly explain what is blood quantum and why is it an affront to our Native American community?
I'm not going to dominate this conversation, but I definitely have an opinion.
Yeah, let me go back to the last question too, because we're talking about systems as well, and then I'll talk about blood quantum. But you know, I think we have to look at all the systems, you know, that have taken place, especially, you know, whether it's the missionization system of the 1700s here locally, or it's all failed federal policies, you know, that we're still dealing with to this day. For example, the Indian Removal Act, right? 1830s all the way to the 1880s. You know, the Comanche, the Indian Wars here. You know, it was all an effort to eradicate. And then, of course, the most recent system was the Indian relocation. It's a failed policy, a failed governmental policy where they paid American Indians to leave the reservations to move into metropolitan areas, right? Again, the same effort, the boarding school effort, you know, kill the Indian, save the man, right? Mentality. And now we have 78% of American Indians living off of reservations in our cities, and we know that they're doing worse in our cities, especially if there isn't a place to connect their culture for them to connect to, right? And so, you know, and now we find ourselves with our cities, you know, with an invisible population, right? That goes underserved. as San Antonio, especially in San Antonio, we have a homeless population in of 8%. We're only 1% of the population in San Antonio, but we're 8%. So across the state, we're overrepresented in all kinds of systems that are just not ready to deal with us. In terms of blood quantum, there are two things that American Indians use for tribal membership, and one is blood quantum, and the other one is lineal descendancy. Blood quantum is the most popular, and it's something that was presented by a federal government. Remember, there are only two things that are there are only three things that are measured by blood quantum: horses, dogs, and Indians. Okay? The degree of Indian blood has, if we were to use that here in Texas and northeastern Mexico and the Southwest primarily, the first time we cut ourselves shaving, that blood would have trickled out of our bodies if we used the same systems here. That's right now, there is nothing holding any tribal community from maintaining a blood quantum other than their right to self-determination. Okay? And what I have told several communities across this country in different conversations is you have to, when you abuse blood quantum, then you move your community from self-determination to self-extermination. And that's what I think we're finding a lot of our communities are finding themselves into now. They're engaging in discriminatory practices against their own people right now.
Yeah.
Right now, because of an imposed system.
Would you explain what exactly blood quantum is to people? Because I think you can tell what it is intuitively, but just in case.
The tribes are allowed. Different tribes are allowed to establish a certain degree of blood quantum for their communities. They have the right to do that, whether it's 1/8, 1/32, in some cases, a quarter blood, half blood. So
that's a percentage of whatever the heritage is, right? The blood heritage
of Indian blood. And of course, there's 100%ers they don't exist anymore primarily, but they're very few and far in between. But every tribe is allowed to establish that degree of blood quantum. The problem that comes in that we see today is that tribes are allowed to, it fluctuates based on economics. And unfortunately, you have families and families being kicked out of tribal communities across this country because of economics. When gaming is introduced into a community, then the blood quantum increases. With communities that don't have gaming and rely on federal subsidies, the blood quantum decreases to allow for more membership. I mean, when you have the Cherokee Nation who just kicked out by court the entire Black Cherokee community, I mean, that's a sad day for families. When you live your life for generations one way, and with the slide of a pen, you can be excommunicated. That's not self-determination. That's self-extermination, and that's a perpetuation of discriminatory practices that have been imposed on us.
Thank you for that. I would like to turn it over to Gregory just to kind of see his input on this.
So I wanted to say that I'm part of the Yolime diaspora, so our native lands are not here in Texas. Our native lands are in Sonora, Mexico. But in the late 19th century, we were expelled from our lands from the Mexican government. So many of our families had to come to the U.S. as refugees. So to add on to the second question, that were what are the systems that led to us, and then going into blood quantum, many Yaquis had to experience not just removing our indigenous identity to come into the U.S., but Americanization, where we had to be American, or quote unquote American, in order to fit into where we are today. Many of us in Texas, and even Yaquis who fled to Missouri or to Colorado, they had to go into Americanization schools where it was no longer, you can't be Mexican, you can't be Native, you have to be American. So many Yaquis have completely removed themselves from our culture and our heritage to the point where they don't teach their children where they're from. My family wasn't even allowed to acknowledge our tribe. We were just told, I was told growing up that we are Native. We had some of these customs that we grew up with, but our name was not allowed to be said until I was 13. And it's because the elders of my family were afraid that I would be lynched. In modern Texas, they were afraid that I would be lynched, just like our family and friends who fled into Texas. And going into the blood quantum, there's two federally recognized Yaqui nations in the U.S. The Pasco Yaqui tribe in Arizona, which does not allow blood quantum to become a citizen, but how they determine if you are Native enough, it's if you have documentation. If your family is from one of the 9 villages that people are from in Mexico, or if it says on your birth certificate or stuff like that within Arizona, as well as other requirements, but that limits Yaquis who didn't have documentation when we fled over to the U.S. So even without blood quantum, these other requirements that some nations have to determine who is still Native enough is still limiting. My family has no documentation because we came here illegally. There's no true way I can ever show or determine how Native I am to my own nation. And the other Yaqui nation is the Texas Band of Yaqui Indians, which is in West Texas, but the Bureau of Indian Affairs removed the ability from the Texas Band of Yaqui Indians to allow citizenship anymore. So they can no longer issue citizenship to Texas Band of Yaqui Indians. No Yaqui person in the U.S. can have true citizenship anymore unless you're born into the reservation or if your family was already part of the Texas Band when it was recognized. It's very difficult for my nation specifically, since I know more about my experience, but yeah, even without blood quantum, it's very difficult to determine who we are. And blood quantum is even used by some Yaquis that I've experienced that I've been told I'm not Native enough because I'm not full-blooded, even though neither nation ever used blood quantum to determine who we are. Yeah, I just wanted to add on.
Thank you, Gregory. Dr. Cynthia, I want to go ahead and see what time allotted. I want Dr. Cynthia to see if she has anything to add to this, and then if we can go ahead and jump on to our next question. Dr. Cynthia, do you have anything you would like to add to this?
Well, I just wanted to comment on what Ramon was saying before regarding the blood quantum. Just to everybody, well, I don't know if everybody knows about the new discoveries on genetics, paleogenetics and archaeogenetics. And these new discoveries change completely the known paradigms that we had in last century. And this century really have to learn a lot about that. So for the indigenous people to know now the new advances in genetics and paleogenetics, and knowing that the indigenous people here has been when we cross the Strait of Bering, and it's been more than 20,000 years and being here as Coahuiltecans more than 12,000 years, that changes completely the paradigms to identify themselves as an indigenous group. So we will have to work on that and change those paradigms so the institution accept the kinds of inclusion that each tribe wants to put forward for themselves in the future. So that's it. That's what I wanted to add.
Thank you, Dr. Cynthia. Going on to our next question, I want to go ahead and ask, it's around decolonization, and it is, what is decolonization and how can this be done to center Native American voices?
Is that question open to anybody that wants to answer?
Yeah, we can go ahead and turn it over, just like our previous questions, to our Indigenous panelists first, and then academics or Gregory, whoever would like to answer after.
Okay.
Dr. Cynthia, did you want to add? So did you want to comment on that? We don't need
well,
to.
Yes. I think that I'm gonna mention something regarding the field of anthropology, which is my specialty. And well, anthropology started as a colonizing field, and unfortunately, that's the way it started historically. So, in my experience, to a field that has been studied like ethnicities and different ethnic groups and tribes, if we do not continue decolonizing this science, it will be impossible to get the help from anthropology and archaeology and the other fields. And I've noticed that, for example, archaeogenetics, it's teaching us how to go forward into taking out many of the previous stigmas that were in anthropology. So we have to really change how we see this science. And when I was like a young student in anthropology, and you can imagine the problems that I had as a Mexican American student to get into the field, I learned that I decided to be an insider anthropologist because it was the only way to continue trying to change our field regarding the study of Mexican Americans in the US. So I think the same goes with the indigenous populations. It's very important that the indigenous define their field of study within anthropology, and also they are insider anthropologists and do not accept that it's wrong, because it's not, because you really have all the advantages of being an insider anthropologist. And that really is a way to decolonize this important field within the humanities and the social sciences. So decolonization is very important even in each person's mind, and go from there to the sciences and to the different fields of study, and try to impact with that our institutions.
I want to just kind of add on to what she's saying, and the decolonization is huge. I mean, it's huge because we've all been colonized, whether we want to admit it or not. We've taken on in a lot of that colonial, those teachings that the colonists brought. We have assimilated those things, and so they're part of us, and we don't even recognize them sometimes. And the insidious part about it is the internal colonization that has happened to us, where we believe the things that they said about us, that we don't know anything, we're not smart, we can't learn,
We're alcoholics.
We're alcoholics, we're drug addicts, we don't know how to take care of our families. All that stuff that we've been told about who we are, a lot of times we take that on. And we think that's true. And so we treat other people who are our people, we treat them badly because we think that's the way they are. And so the decolonization is at many different levels. You know, the academic level is one part of that, but the community level is where it's really going to make a difference. I mean, the scholarly stuff is important because it in one way or another it eventually trickles down.
Mhm.
But the community stuff is where life is. You know, that's where we know how to be who we are. And when we start saying, you know, a really good example of colonization is the tribal conflicts.
Yep.
The decolonization has to come with us being able to work with each other as tribal groups. And the system, you're talking about the system a little while ago, the system is set up so that the federally recognized tribes have certain priorities over things, and the non-federally recognized tribes like us have, you know, we're struggling all the time just to get heard. And so that colonization is built into that system. And so it really just makes it that much harder. So the decolonization part has to start with us saying, you know, I don't want to go by that anymore. I don't want that to be the way things are anymore. I want my children to grow up not having to assimilate, not understand. I want my children to be bicultural or tricultural. I don't want them to be assimilated.
And even
Ramon's family is a very good example of people who have been brought up in the traditions and know how to be bicultural. They know how to be in the U.S. culture. I'm not going to say American culture, the U.S. culture, and they know how to be in a tribal culture. And so that's I think is where decolonization it has to go.
And even going back to like the last question, blood quantum is a huge colonization factor
Exactly.
in this system too. So thank you.
Yeah, it's you know, it's like Linda said, it's a huge thing to tackle. But I think the one thing that we have to remember is that our people, you know, we've gone from a monocultural society to a bicultural society and living very much in a multicultural society. And so when we talk about decolonizing, I think it's already happening, you know, slowly. Look, you know, when we talk about it, going back to what Linda said, I mean, we have to look internally as well, because, you know, the way we behave to other Indian people is ridiculous. I mean, we have Indian communities out there that think that they're more Indians than others.
Mhm.
I've heard American Indians refer to people of Texas as Mexican Indians. What's the difference? So I think that there's a lot of ignorance out there. And I think that a lot of our own tribal people, we engage in our own discriminatory practices against each other. And even within the Mexican American communities, I mean, we still love novelas. We still believe that the lighter skinned individual based in the novelas is the patrones.
Mm-hmm.
The darker ones are going to be the maids and the butlers and the landscapers. And we're okay with that. So I think until we start addressing some of the internal things that go on within our families and our own communities, you know, we can, you know, and within the tribal communities across this country, when we can stop thinking that we're more Indian than you are, because we have a card or the federal government allows us permission to say that, because we have a government to government relationship, because we lost a battle, that we have more rights than those that never stopped fighting and never lost a battle, but are still walking and living on the same grounds that their grandparents are buried in, are less than you, then we can talk about the larger question about decolonization.
Yeah. I would like to turn it over to Gregory to see if he has anything to speak on this, and then our academic panelists.
So for me, learning what decolonization is, it's physical and mental, where of course physical decolonization is removing this idea that the borders are legitimate, they're colonial borders, they're meant to separate us. And mental goes into what I've experienced is that a lot of people don't recognize indigenous gender and sexual identities. In these modern terms that we use for sex and gender here in the West, like lesbian, gay, or transgender terms, they're new for English, the English language, but these ideas and concepts are not new at all for many cultures around the world, especially indigenous nations. But every time I hear someone trying to understand a two-spirit identity, they try to translate it or try to understand it into Western terms, but many of these identities are not like these Western terms. For example, the Navajo Nation, I believe they have 6 different identities, gender identities, but we've become so accustomed to these modern terms, these Western terms, that we fail to recognize or really understand what these terms are. So that's one of the movements for decolonization in the LGBTQ part of Indigenous studies and Indigenous groups is bringing back these identities and teaching what they are rather than just trying to translate them into Western identities. A very good friend of mine, they're Two-Spirit, and they met someone who was trying to understand what their identity was, and just automatically was, oh, so you're non-binary. And he said, well, it's more complex than that. Our identity is more spiritual. It's related to the traditional belief systems that we have, not necessarily just outside of the spectrum. So it's very that's part of decolonization that I've seen in Indigenous communities, and something I'm experiencing is not just decolonizing from the physical borders or what separates us as native and non-native, etc. It's also how much we've been taught to believe that there's only 2 genders and that these sexualities, they don't exist because they're illegitimate, they're sinful, they're wrong. When so many nations, so many cultures in the Americas, it was just normal. It was just normal to be LGBTQ, etc. And another thing I want to add on for what I believe Ramon brought up was that these colonial ideas about like blood quantum and everything have been so ingrained into our community so much that, at least from my experience as a Yaqui person within our diaspora, when I met someone who was on the Pascua Yaqui tribe reservation in Arizona, I asked have they ever worked with other Yaquis like from Texas or Sonora or those in California. And he was very uncomfortable when I asked him that. He said, well, we don't really work with the Yaquis over there because they're not Yaqui. And I thought, we're just in different places. So it becomes so ingrained into our communities that if you're off the reservation or if you're from another part of the diaspora, you cannot be more Yaqui than I am. And that's just how ingrained it is into our culture. It's going to be a very difficult fight to take out these colonial ideas from our cultures in our communities when someone from the reservation that I met believes that I am less Yaqui just because I don't live in the PYT Nation when I live here in San Antonio. And I want to add on one last thing. The anti-Blackness in Indigenous communities is very colonial. What Ramon brought up earlier was the Cherokee Nation removing Black Cherokee. The Cherokee Nation isn't the only nation that's considering or has done that. I've heard I believe the Chickasaw Nation is also thinking about removing Black Chickasaw from the Chickasaw Nation. And that Afro-Indigenous people are not seen as Indigenous by Indigenous people. And on TikTok, if you know that app, that Creators app, there's a lot of Afro-Indigenous people on there who are trying to teach more about Afro-Indigenous people and cultures. But many Indigenous people in the comment sections that I've seen have been saying, how are you Indigenous though? Why do you say Afro-Indigenous? Just pick one. When it's Afro-Indigenous people do exist, and they don't have to pick one. They don't have to pick being Black or Indigenous when many cultures such as Black Seminole, Black Cherokee, Black California Native, they are both. That's how it, they were colonized just like us. They have the right to be both. And I've heard there was another anti-Black statement that I heard from within the Indigenous communities is that Black people are also colonizers because they're not from our lands. And that was so ridiculous to hear because, Black people were brought to the Americas as slaves. They were colonized just like us. They don't have a place to go back to. They are here. They are part of this land too. We shouldn't call them colonizers because they weren't. And just to cut down my time, so many anti-Black statements and anti-Black sentiments within Indigenous communities are because of colonization, and it's very, very rife within our communities. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to our academic panelists. If we can just keep our responses possibly to like 3 minutes or so, just because of time.
So I just wanted to add on to what various people have said about this colonizing mindset. So I started teaching in 2001, and 20 years later, we're still battling the same thing. We're still using words like explorers, settlers, pioneers to describe the Spanish, the French, the English who came here. And they're not pioneers. You cannot call someone a pioneer if they weren't the first ones here. But the textbooks, so that's one of the pushes we have to make. The textbooks are so behind. I might in my classroom be teaching students something, lecturing on something, but the textbook doesn't match what I'm trying to teach. The textbook still says westward expansion. So we have discussions in my class. Oh, that sounds so neutral, right? Expanding. If you have white Americans going westward, they're not just expanding, they're invading other people's lands. So the language in the textbooks, as much as I might be teaching about invaders, Europeans and Americans who are taking over, stealing, destroying cultures, I don't have a textbook to match. So that's one of the issues that I have faced. And I'll just turn it over to Dr. Linsenbart so she can add her experiences.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that as a key issue, which perhaps we may talk about this later, but one avenue we could maybe do to start correcting that in our own classrooms is not really using a textbook and using our own materials on the topics that we're covering that are from Indigenous scholars and creators and authors. And I also think it's really necessary, actually, for non-Indigenous scholars or academics and community members leaders that they are taking on this, I don't want to say role, but making sure that they are serving as interrupters as well. So interrupting the colonial narrative at every point, and also being able to know how and when always to walk with Indigenous community members, and as a way, and the ways that they feel is best, instead of kind of, as I think often white people will do, is they'll try to put in their own narrative of why they think something is the best way to do it, instead of stepping back and really working with Indigenous community members.
Thank you. So for our next question, it's going to be on accountability. So I just wanted to go ahead and ask, how can we acknowledge and recognize the existence of urban tribes within our community? And again, Indigenous panelists, and then we can turn it over to Gregory and academics.
I think one of the things is that we got to remember is what I mentioned earlier. Like, for example, San Antonio is the 10th largest city with an American Indian population in the country per capita. Nobody would know that. You don't know that because they're invisible. They're invisible to the rest of our community and to the local government. And so I think that we need to continue to push when we have a local government that talks about equity and the Office of Equity and equity this and equity that, and we need to continue to push until we're part of that equity discussion and not the other or something else, that we are actually lifted up to that, to the table when it comes to the conversation about equity. And I think that we've done that here in San Antonio. I think we have a lot of work to do in Texas. But I think we still have work to do in San Antonio, but we got to continue to lift up the narrative of San Antonio's history. I mean, if you listen to people talk about San Antonio's history, you would think that when the Spanish got here, they were greeted by mariachis. And that's what we believe. That's what people believe. Our visitors, 1 million people to come to San Antonio, and they leave dumber than when they arrived because of the history and the narratives that they're being fed. So, I think we got to continue to hold our systems accountable, our school systems, and our local government in terms of how they're telling our history. We're still contributing. As American Indians, we're still contributing to San Antonio. We contributed historically, we contributed, and we're still contributing. Our people are doctors, lawyers, our city council members, our state representatives. They are descendants of the original people of this land, and they are still contributing. We should not be the afterthought.
I think part of it too is getting people to recognize their own indigeneity, their own roots. They may not have been raised in indigenous culture, but that doesn't mean they don't have some sort of connection to indigeneity. And it's a hard thing too, because what happens a lot of times is people want to become Indians. They see that they do a DNA test and they see that they're 5% Native American, and all of a sudden they want to be Indians and they want to go to ceremonies and they want to do all this stuff, and they don't know how to do any of it, and it really doesn't make any sense to them. But there has to be a way for us to somehow incorporate that, to use that in some kind of way, because there is now, I think, for the first time in my lifetime, that people are wanting to know about Native Americans. They want to hear the stories. They want to know the truth. They want to see what's going on. And I think AIT has done a lot to create environments where people can come and learn about different aspects of the native population here. There have been a number of different venues and activities and that sort of thing, which of course right now are not really happening as much, but that give people an opportunity to learn about the history of the indigenous people here in this country, but as well as just in San Antonio. And like, you know, as Ramon has said, you know, Texas is a tough one because people think there are no Indians in Texas. I had a friend who flew over. She was flying from New Mexico to somewhere across the state, like from New Mexico, I guess, to Arkansas or Florida or someplace. And she was looking as they were flying over, and she said, you know, I don't understand how it can be possible that there are no native people in Texas because there's water everywhere. There are all these rivers and all that, you know, and you don't have native people where there are, you always have native people where there's water, where there are rivers, where there's oceans, where there's water that they can get to for whatever reason, right? And I think, you know, it's just that there's been such a systematic attempt and effort to negate indigenous presence. And it's now, you know, we've got to go the other direction and do what we can, you know, and I think there are a number of efforts to do that, and we just need to support them.
Thank you, Linda. I want to go ahead and pass it over to Dr. Cynthia just to see if she can give us some insight on this question as well.
Yes, one of the most important aspects in San Antonio, just going directly into the San Antonio landscape, is the 5 missions of San Antonio that are World Heritage sites. And it's impressive in the negative sense how the indigenous people, the Coahuiltecans, that built those missions aren't there, recognized by the UNESCO and by the different governments from the local all the way to the national. And I think that's a very important aspect of our city that we really have to develop in terms of letting people know that the Coahuiltecans built those missions, and I don't know why they are not the owners of the land surrounding. That takes us to the acknowledgement of land. But I think that there's an area that really have to be changed in terms of the optic from the local to the international, that those missions belong to the Coahuiltecans. Of course, the Franciscans were there to guide, but at that time, the Franciscans were like having bonding with these people because they love nature as much as the Coahuiltecans love nature. So in those terms, in that relationship, there was not this conflict that evolved later when they were, secularized. But I think that it's a lot of work that we have to do regarding the acknowledging of the indigenous people related to the importance of those missions, especially that they are World Heritage sites. So that's one area that I really would like to be developed in those terms.
Thank you. Gregory, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you. We have about 3 minutes before we cut into like an intercession time. So I just wanted to give you the opportunity to maybe close us out on this question.
I believe at least here in San Antonio, so many of our missions and historic sites like the Alamo and San Pedro Springs Park paint us as if we just don't exist anymore. Focusing on the Alamo for a minute, I remember going there years ago. I haven't been lately, but I just remember that we were there for a moment, gone for the rest of the time. The Alamo is for the revolution, the Texas Revolution, that all that dominates the Alamo when the history of indigenous Coahuiltecan people who were brought to the Alamo when it was a mission, that history is overlooked so often. So I think where we can acknowledge and recognize and support urban people, at least here in San Antonio, is to have our historic sites recognize and uplift more Indigenous voices in histories rather than just the Texas Revolution. That's it. That's the history of our state. Long live the Texas Republic, all that stuff. As well as festivals. This is controversial because I know a lot of people like Fiesta, but Fiesta is very colonial and doesn't acknowledge or even bring up Indigenous culture or history within this huge festival, a month-long event that's just partying every week, leading up to the parades and everything. But those parades are very colonial and bring up more of the Spanish monarchy and all that rather than people who are from here. So I think that's one of the ways, at least here in San Antonio, where we can uplift more and support Native people is, I guess, transforming our festivals to recognize more of the Native part of our history and culture rather than just continuing to promote Spanish history and culture and the Texas Revolution and all that, as well as our historic sites can, not focus on the revolution so much and focus more on the thousands and thousands of years worth of history that was already here. And then schools, but that's just going to be a whole rant. Having our public education system here in San Antonio recognize more Indigenous people in our classes rather than just as, being extinct. Yeah.
Thank you, Gregory. So with closing out that question, we're going to go ahead and break into a 5-minute intercession. This will give time to the viewers to go ahead and ask, possibly drop any questions in the comment section for our panelists, and our panelists to go ahead and just take a break. Thank you. Hi, so welcome back, everyone. I hope you guys had a good 5-minute break. I guess we are going to go ahead and go into our Q&A from our audience. The first question that we have here are what are some things non-Indigenous people can do to stand in solidarity with American Indians?
One thing that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay.
Again, we can do this like we were doing before.
Okay.
Our Indigenous panelists, Gregory, academics.
Oh, okay. One thing that I think non-Indigenous people can do is to stop conversations or comments that sound prejudicial about Native Americans. You know, when people make jokes or they say, I don't know, different things, you can, that in the same way that you would stop any other racist remark, you would just comment on it and ask them, please, stop. I don't want to hear that. I don't think it's funny. Whatever you want to say to make sure that people understand that you don't, it's not appropriate for you to be talking that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's one obvious way. If you can support different organizations, either as a volunteer or in some other kind of way, then that's always really helpful. There are several different organizations, one of which is AIT, which I think you should know I'm aligned with AIT. So this is not a commercial statement, but just want you all to know that there are organizations that can do it. There are places like the San Antonio Museum of Art or the Whitty Museum that support some sorts of, the Briscoe also has activities that are about Native Americans. You can go to those and attend those and find out what they have to say and then give that information. Read, there's beginning to be more and more non-academic kinds of publications that have to do with Native Americans. Those are just my thoughts.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also, one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people make is they, they think that all American Indians are the same, and so just because I do it this way over here with this person, I can do it everywhere else the same with another tribal community, and I think that's it's a mistake, and it's we're very much different. We're very different, and our history here in Texas, especially South Texas, is very different than the rest of the history of American Indians across this country. And so, it's making time to learn about the people and our region, and we can't get caught up on that border. It's because it's not just on the south; it's on the north of this country as well. That the mistakes are made, and but I think, like Linda said, just helping out, and then also just holding our city leaders accountable. You can call your city council person, the mayor, and say, when there's issues that have to do with American Indian, like, what just happened with Indigenous Peoples Day, what's going on with the Alamo and the fight. There's 2 lawsuits right now pending with the fight of the Alamo. If you believe in and support it, call your city council person, state reps, and make sure that we're being given equal representation under the laws of Texas.
Thank you.
That the laws of Texas are being applied. It's not even, part of it's equal representation, but the other part of it is for them to follow the law.
One of the other things that people can do just to start learning about the Coahuiltecans in San Antonio and in Texas, it's to take the tours of the mission tours. So you will have another perspective of the missions, going with Manuel from the American Indians of Texas. And it's like just a start. And from there, you can continue reading about the Coahuiltecans and about expanding to the other Northern American tribes, so to know the differences and see how important it is to support the Coahuiltecans and the Tapilam Nation here in San Antonio and in Texas.
Real quick, I just want to add one more thing. We're talking about San Antonio, but we have indigenous and tribal communities that are fighting right now. On the border wall issue, the Carrizo Come Crudo, we need to stand strong with their efforts along the border walls. And the other fights that are going on with the pipelines and natural gas issues that are happening right now, in Texas. So, stay informed.
Definitely. Real quick on that last question, if we can go back to it. I kind of wanted just to add a little input on what are some things that non-Indigenous people can do to stand in solidarity with American Indians. I feel like there's a lot of with non-Indigenous people, just kind of watching your language as well, because you see a lot now is like, oh, that's my spirit animal, that's my tribe. And I feel like that alone is harmful to Indigenous people. So I feel like even little things like that, little changes could be standing in solidarity with us, as well as I'm a huge advocate for missing and murdered Indigenous women. So instead of scrolling past, those missing posts of our women, share it. And that can also support us, bringing out that awareness to that epidemic as well, and just little things like that. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there as well. Our next question is, how does Texas begin recognizing our urban Native communities?
Well, it starts with our Texas legislature. I think if we're going to be blunt and we're going to be honest, the leadership right now is not interested in ethnic studies focused curriculum in the school. So we have to be involved in politics too. We have to support candidates who want to expand the narratives that young people are learning in pre-K through 12 and higher education.
I also think that it's important that people understand that Texas is one, if not the only last state in the country that does not have an Indian commission or policy on, to support American Indian families. And that's a problem. And that's a problem. And one of the reasons that it stopped, going back to the earlier conversations about discriminatory practices, one of the main reasons that it was halted was because of the 3 federally recognized tribes in Texas. The fear was that having a Texas Indian Commission would minimize or impact their gaining in Texas. So, these are the realities that unfortunately our people, when we talk about being colonized, where they're at.
Yeah. And the really sad part about that is that the casinos are such an important piece of their economic existence,
Yeah. Also, I was checking what universities in Texas had any Native American studies, and only UT Austin has a very small curriculum, but they only give certificate. And it's part of the diversity studies. So I was shocked that, well, I knew that San Antonio didn't have, but I was hoping that some other big university, a Texas university would have it. But really, they are not acknowledging it. So we really have to change the mindset of the administrators of the universities and the whole school system to change that and start recognizing the urban Native communities in Texas.
Gregory, would you like to add anything?
Not as much, but just going back into supporting urban Native communities is help. I think a lot of the other things, a lot of the big things were already touched on, but I think supporting urban Native business owners to be a good way to supporting them. I know from my nation, there's a lot of people who make these ojo de canals. So I think if you're a non-native person who wants to support urban native communities, is helping small native-owned businesses. And if you're going to purchase an item from any store or company, make sure it's native made, native owned, and is it sacred? So should you not purchase? Should you not buy this to just wear it? Should you learn what this item is about, or is it something that you can? And basically, don't purchase regalia if you are not native yourself, and if you don't know the significance of it. But do support native-owned businesses.
Thank you for that. Real quick on this question, I know I'm facilitating, but I would really like to give my perspective on this. Going back to what Dr. Ramos had said, in education, being a Native educator, seeing a lot of past tense in textbooks and curriculum acting like we do not exist anymore, I feel like diminishes or totally erases the space that could possibly be created for Indigenous littles or children that may be in our classrooms. And I feel like by recognizing Indigenous people in curriculum could even create that space for our urban Native communities. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as well, that the education system is something that's really big that needs to be tackled in recognizing and bringing light to our Indigenous communities within across Turtle Island. So the next question is, what are some resources for those of us that wish to learn more about our culture and traditions?
Well, the resources are there, starting with the American Indians of Texas in the Spanish colonial missions and the tours. So just to start learning, it's just going to the places that hold the information on the Native Americans in starting in San Antonio, and as Ramon said before, continue expanding to the whole state of Texas. And there's reading, there's institutions. You just open the website and type like Native Americans in Texas, and you will have some institutions, some organizations, and you start from there, from the real world knowledge of what exists there, and then trying to continue on reading about the Native Americans in the different states, in the different struggles that they and we are having, because I think that there's a point in which you really, as a non-native, cannot separate yourself from the Native Americans, because somehow we share that experience, especially the minorities. We are there sharing and have the same experience, but it comes to a point where there's the same road. So I think that if we start like trying to see what the organizations are doing, then you can jump into action from there.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I'd also like to say that if you're a university student or a college student, look, seek out the Dr. Brooke and the Dr. Ramoses on your campuses. Those that are a little bit more sensitive and open to the conversation. And then of course, the Tepilanqua Witecan Nation on Facebook. You can, the website Tepilanqua Witecan on Facebook, AIT Facebook page. We have an extensive archive as well, for historical documents. We have several different scholars that have left their collections to us, and it's just growing and growing. So the other thing too is we get a lot of requests and for DNA and other type of genealogical support. So if you reach out to us, the one thing I want to say is bear with us, be patient. It doesn't happen fast. We have people that have been waiting for a year, and so just that's all I can ask. Be patient. We won't forget about your request. It's not something that we set out to do, but we find ourselves doing right now.
But the other thing to kind of follow up with what Dr. Cynthia said is that it's, they're volunteer to these organizations, get to know the people in them, because how do I want to say this politely? Some of us in the community, in the Indigenous community, are a little gun shy, shall we say, because people have come in and wanted to get involved, and they want to immediately become part of the tribe, and it just, doesn't work that way. It takes time, you have to learn, you do have to learn the ways. You do have to learn how to be around us in a different way, because we operate in a little bit different way sometimes. And so volunteer, we do, not so much now, but, when we do these open air markets, when we have powwows and mini powwows, and there's lots of different ways that you can get involved. We have a movie festival, we have poetry readings, we have these tours. There's all these different kinds of activities that an AIT sponsors, and I know there are other organizations that do the same thing. So, get involved with that, and just feel your way around. You're not gonna be, how do I want to say this? You're not gonna be the king of the world overnight, or the queen of the world overnight. You've got to work your way up. It's just like in any other social situation. You come in as a newcomer and you feel your way around, and you get to know people, and people get to know you, and you build trust, and then you can begin to be part of the community, perhaps.
Thank you, Linda. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up the Q&A section, so we can go ahead and go into our closing with Mona and Ramon. But I just also, to our audience, I did want to apologize not being able to get to all of the questions. However, I believe they're going to go ahead and drop some resources in the comment section, just so the ones that are watching from home can go ahead and access and ask any questions from there that they may have. Like Ramon had said, you can always reach out to AIT. So we're going to go ahead and pass it over to our panelists and allow them to close out as well.
So I want to thank you for the invitation and for doing this and having these, making the space for these conversations to happen. I think it's so important that we recognize the contributions that American Indians have made to this country, and that we don't allow, that our contributions to be the afterthought. Even with such an important historical event that happened this past year with the elections, where the American Indians contributed significantly to the new president of this country. And, when we can flip states like Arizona and Michigan and by mainstream media, be referred to as something else, was very disheartening. And we have to remember that we can control the narrative if we can begin to the narrative. And that's where we rely on scholars like Dr. Ramos and Dr. Brooke, who are working with communities like ours, to give back to our communities and help lift our communities up as well. So I just want to thank y'all. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you for the questions. I'm sure there was other questions that hopefully we can get to somehow. But thank you for your interest and your patience and sticking with us.
Thank you. Linda, if you want to go ahead and say your closing.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to thank San Antonio College and the Center for Mexican American Studies for sponsoring this and letting us be involved, inviting us to be part of this. Thank you, Selena, for being the moderator. I really appreciate it. You did a really nice job. And thank you to Dr. Cynthia and Dr. Linson Bart and Dr. Ramos, and also to Gregory and to Ramon I was looking at some of the comments and the questions that were in the comment box from the people who are watching. You all had some very good questions, and I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to respond to them. I don't know, maybe there might be some other way to do that in the future. I'm not sure what that is, but thank you all for participating. Thank you for to be willing to listen to us and to be interested in things that are going on with the Native American community in San Antonio, in Texas, and wherever. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Cynthia, if you want to go ahead and say your closing.
Yes, well, thank you very much for having invited me. It was very interesting, and I think it's a very important conversation that has to be critically continued. And I hope that this won't be the only one conversation that will be organized by SAC and by AIT. I really appreciate your having this. I think that it's very important, especially for our youth and for this new century, that we really have to change completely the paradigms that were taught to us and come with a new narrative and a new worldview for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Greg and then Lisa and Brooke.
I wanted to say thank you for having me be here today as a student getting to contribute to this conversation. And for those of you who are watching who are non-native, I want to say thank you for coming to watch. I think it's very important for those who are outside of our communities to also learn about the kind of experiences that we have to go through and learn how you can support us. In my experience with trying to help non-native students who were in my high school or who didn't understand necessarily what I and a fellow classmate of mine had to go through as Native students, it was very hard for them to get a grasp of what we were talking about. So yes, do find more, get out there to support more Native voices, sign those petitions, go out there and protest safely with everything going on, support Native-owned businesses, and I encourage that you take as many Indigenous courses or ethnic studies courses to learn more about how you can support people.
So to follow up on what Greg was saying, one of the things I try to do, Greg has taken 2 of my classes and he is brilliant. So turning the stage over to our Indigenous students, he knows his own history. So I don't always have to be the person teaching it, putting him on stage. So when we were on Zoom in the screen, he'd hold court on the side and he'd be teaching. I was like, oh, I love this. There's 2 professors in the class, and being humble enough as academics, college professors, being humble enough to know that there's some things we don't just know. So it's up to us too to share the stage. And then the other thing that I think is important is, like Ramon was saying, there's all this talk about equity at the city level, but also it's facts. So we have to hold our administrators accountable. You're talking about equity, so why don't we have scholarships for Native American students? I've had students who've identified in my class. They say they're Kickapoo, they say they're Apache, they're Bolivarian. Well, we should talk about it. They're here, so how do we get them scholarships? And then the last thing I wanted to add was historical markers. SAC, the land that we sit on, is Indigenous lands, and it's very sacred Indigenous land. Why is there no historical marker on SAC's campus recognizing that? So those are the kinds of things that I would like to use my power, my stage at SAC. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Brooke.
Yes. Thank you all for this wonderful conversation and necessary conversation. And I want to reiterate something that Lisa has put forward, that recognizing that and stating that I'm not the expert of someone else's lived experiences. So that's something I think it's really important for non-Indigenous scholars, or if they are, the power dynamics in a classroom, to be acknowledged and upfront with that with students. and also recognize or know, as we are educators or teaching, that U.S. history is just a small part of the indigenous histories of Turtle Island, and to ground it in that focus, even in a class that would be quote unquote U.S. history, like at SAC 1301 or 1302. So grounding it actually and recognizing that U.S. history is just a very small part of a long, a broader and longer indigenous histories of these lands. And so the last thing I guess that I would like to add is actually part of this conversation and why it's so important. And if SAC wants to take on a role of decolonizing or creating action plans to decolonize, it has to be preceded with conversation, with ongoing commitments to living indigenous, not erasure, not this quote unquote vanishing Indian mythology, but to living indigenous communities and people and nations, and it must be followed by that too. It has to be preceded and followed by, so, you know, land acknowledgements or other type of actionable items that SAC may tend to take, you know, in the future. I just recommend that those conversations and ongoing commitments must be founded in before and must be ongoing. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we go ahead and pass it over to finish our closing out, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone watching and tuning in for this critical conversation, and as well as all the panelists. It was an honor to be able to facilitate this event with you guys. So thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Mona, the Director of Student Success for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusive Excellence at San Antonio College.
Thank you, Selena. My name is Mona Aldana Ramirez. I am affiliated with San Antonio College, and I want to say good afternoon to everyone who is part of this conversation. And above all, I want to say thank you to all of our panelists. A big thank you to our tribal elders, our educators, and our Native American student, Gregory, for bringing this truth to power. This is time well spent during our 2021 Dream Week here in San Antonio, Texas. This critical conversation, achieving tribal and urban Native equity, has been a long time coming. It could not have been made possible without each and every one of you coming in and wanting to be part of this. Now, this is just a beginning conversation. This event actually was spurred from a long conversation that started back in the fall of 2020, when I reached out to Ramon D. Vasquez Jr., the executive director of American Indians of Texas at the Spanish Colonial Missions. And I said, hey, we're working on this goal of inclusive excellence. What is it that we can do to recenter our Native American voices? Of course, starting from beginning to look at a land acknowledgement when we do our work here at our community college here in San Antonio. How do we make it happen? How do we center the voices? How can our institution partner with our urban Native tribes so that we can not only talk the talk, but walk this walk of equity and inclusion? Now, our event today was a conversation, or a beginning of a conversation on the Native American history landscape and education. We talked about decolonization efforts to recenter this Native American voice, and of course, accountability, those things that need to happen within our community so that we make sure it is actionable and that we hold people accountable. Most importantly, what we wanted to do was leave today with an open invitation to each and every one of you who attended, either through our YouTube or through our Facebook, and invite you to be part of the continuing conversation for future work, to continue this, to collaborate and engage with our American Indians of Texas. As our poet laureate, Amanda Gorman, stated in her poetry a couple of weeks ago, when day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it. If only we're brave enough to be it. Hopefully today's conversation also sparks some ideas on how you can be part of the solution to elevate a collective knowledge of our urban tribal communities. If you want to be a part of this coalition to recenter our Native American voices here in San Antonio, Texas, please send an email to our American Indians of Texas. The email itself will be scrolling down the ribbon within this broadcast so that you can be part of this conversation and chip in so that you can make contact, rather. I'm looking for the scroll, the email, sorry, the behind the scenes folks. Here we go. Visit us at AIT-SCM at AIT-SCM.org. That is the email you can send in and say you want to be included in future events and conversations. So this is only the beginning. We don't say goodbye. We say until later. Thank you. And now I turn it over to our fabulous moderator. Thank you, Selena Cantu, for doing this and moderating in a fabulous way. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. This is Ramon D. Vasquez here again to kind of close this out with the blessing. Mona, thank you so much for that acknowledgement. And although I would love that one day this that title as executive director, that would go to one of our panelists, the other Ramon on our panel. Great person to have on our panel. All of our panelists were excellent. Thank you to our elders. Thank you to our scholars. Thank you to our Native students, our moderator, Selena. Thank you all so much for this. Thank you, SAC, also Mona, Dr. Ramos, Dr. Brooke for and Miriam and Yassine's, for helping us make this happen. Thank you to my team so much. Eric, Manuel, helping me put this together. This has definitely been a long time coming. And this is also a very, very intriguing opportunity to see what we can really unfold in this time to come. And so I will leave you all here today with this quick little blessing, just a closing out of our ceremony here, if you will. And thank you all to our audience so much for the wonderful questions. We definitely want to answer those questions that we couldn't get to. So keep them coming. Keep in touch with us on our Facebook pages, our Instagram pages, our website. Contact us by email, however it is that you want to get in touch with us and have those questions answered. We will make that happen. Thank you all so much again. So in closing, if you will, just humble me here a little bit. I want to say, Nalet Sam Tamok. Thank you, Creator, today for this beautiful blessing of the day, of this time, this conversations, this way of how we can achieve true equity for our peoples as Indigenous folks, as tribal communities, as Aboriginal communities, as First Peoples, as urban Native people that see themselves off reservation now, away from those earned benefits and things that they may have long awaited and had greater access to amongst their families, amongst their reservations, amongst their communities. And even those detribalized folks, those people that have yet to be able to connect once again to their ancestry, connect once again to their tribal community, to their ancestry, and those that are really seeking, to engage in that way. We will try our best to make way for those people, honor those people. Creator, help them find that way to make that connection again, to find those songs, to find that language, to find that beauty that they want to hold on to. Help them continue that opportunity. Thank you, Creator, for blessing us with this opportunity to honor our work as an organization, as American Indians in Texas, honor the work of tribal peoples from here in the South Texas region, known to Coahuiltecan peoples as Yanawana, and to those Estopna relatives and Carrizo-Comecrudo relatives as Somisek, and all those other tribal communities that made this place home. How is it that they honor and acknowledge this place? We want to give thanks for allowing this time, this space, this effort, and all of this all of this beauty in these conversations and wonderful answers to these difficult questions. So again, we say nalet sam to you all. Thank you all. Thank you to our interpreters, especially. Thank you to all of our relatives that helped make this possible. Thank you again. We'll see y'all.